I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good evening, Bowling Green. Good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and soon, hopefully, we'll be joined by my remarkable co-host, Rebecca Wood. And together, Rebecca and I will be giving you an hour of unforgettable radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and families, and the birds and the bees and the deer and the dogs and pretty much everybody and everything, because, like it or not, we're all wrapped up together on this wonderful planet called Earth. And we have a wonderful show for you today. We're going to chat for another 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to go off to an interview we did with Cathy Cowan-Becker, who is going to talk to us about Senate Bill 2, the big old bill that we talked about some last week, but she's going to go into a little more detail about this kind of crazy bill that is defining coal, nuclear, and gas as green energy. And so we'll look forward to that. Then we'll hear from our wonderful advertisers and patrons. And we got a few public service announcements to go after that also. Then Rebecca is going to join us, and she has texted me that her topic this week is the Biminy Road. And I'm not exactly sure what the Biminy Road is, but sounds interesting. Then it's ecological news from around the world, and hopefully we'll hear from you folks at some point. I've been getting some very helpful emails from people who are like suggesting stories that I might want to cover, and they're sending them to Joe at joedemare4agreenfuture.org, and you can send me any kind of feedback at that email, or you can text 419-973-5841 at any time, and we'd love to hear from you folks. So, sadly, I have to dedicate this week's show to our friend Mic Gonzalez, who was the host of The Cheap Seats, the show that aired just before ours for years now here on 100.7 FM, The Ticket. And I never actually got to hang with Mick much, but, you know, we would meet as we were passing, and we'd have little conversations. And sometimes you can just tell when somebody's like a great guy, you know, a good guy to have as a friend. And he was always very generous in using some of his time on his show to plug our show that, you know, followed right after. So we're really going to miss him. And, you know, we don't know exactly how he passed, but we do know he was fighting cancer for the second time. And we've all lost people to cancer. I mean, I lost my wife to endometrial cancer in 2021, and nobody in America right now, as far as I know, has been able to go without losing some friends or family to cancer. And I think it's important that we remember them and that we remember, those of us who are old enough to remember, tell the younger generation about the time when cancer was not something lots of people died from. I mean, I'm 62, I was born back in the 60s, and in the 60s and 70s, people rarely died of cancer. I mean, the treatments weren't as good. There just wasn't as much cancer. And so we've sort of come over the decades, slowly the rates keep increasing. Well, the number of people who get cancer keep increasing. They tell us that the rates are going down, but I don't see it. I see lots of people dying of cancer, like Mick, like my wife, like so many people that we all know. And so that's why it's so important to keep what I call a cultural memory. It's important that those of us who remember a time when cancer was rare tell the younger generation about it, because as far as they know, this is normal. People who were born after the year 2000, they just kind of accept that lots and lots of people die from cancer. And if you get to that point, then you stop trying to prevent it. The reasons people are dying from cancer are things like pollutants, like radiation that we're putting in the environment, like the microbe and the nanoplastics and all these chemicals. And so we need to keep fighting the pollutants that are causing the cancer, because cancer really sucks. It takes a lot of loved ones from us, and it's just a horrible thing to go through. But this idea of the cultural memory of the causes of cancer and the times before the cancer, I've been having in the past couple weeks conversations with a lot of young activists, and I've been kind of shocked to realize that a lot of them have no cultural memory of, for example, the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Okay, that was just 14 years ago, right? Not that long in terms of like generations of people, but Fukushima, where 3 nuclear power plants melted down and sent this tremendous cloud of radiation all over the world, including the U.S. The radiation blew over our continent from Japan. And whenever you put radiation in the environment, you cause cancers. But a lot of young people have never heard of Fukushima. They don't know about it. They don't remember it. And so when they hear the pro-nuclear propaganda that's being put out by the government and by the nuclear corporations that want to make billions of dollars building these things, and they're told, oh, this is the solution to global warming, they don't have the other side of the story. They don't have that cultural memory that those of us who were around at the time, I think a lot of us will never forget that gigantic mushroom cloud that appeared, that formed after the nuclear plant exploded at Fukushima. And so we have to do a better job of transferring that cultural memory, because it's not something that will just happen unless we consciously make a decision to do it. And of course, a lot of societies, well, most human societies actually, that cultural memory, that verbal memory, that, the older people telling stories to the younger people, that's how information was transferred. That's what created the cultural memory, which created the cultures. And for example, in the case of the indigenous people of North America, those stories are what created the mindset that allowed people to live on this continent for some 30,000 plus years without depleting its resources, so that when us Europeans arrived, we called it a pristine, an untapped continent. But in reality, the indigenous people were very tightly tied to the land, and they managed the land. They used fire, they used, they used axes, and they used a whole bunch of techniques to keep the planet, the North American continent, fertile and productive. And we just sort of came in with our plows and our saws and kind of messed that whole structure up. But the key to doing it successfully is the cultural memory. And we still see examples of that in places like the Menominee Reservation up there in Michigan, where they have done a forestry program that relies on that cultural memory and relies on the information about their trees in order to both live off the land, in other words, harvest the timber, but keep the whole reservation healthy. The timber, the trees in the Menominee Reservation are incredibly healthy, and if you walk through it, you can mistake that for virgin forest. And the reason is because they take care of it and they share with each other how to take care of it. And the goal is not just getting money. The goal is improving the land, and they succeed in that goal. But this is partly why it's so terrible when we see things that are trying to eliminate that memory. And just one example of how the government is trying to do that right now is I was kind of shocked. I took a trip up to Michigan, to Ann Arbor this past week, and I actually stopped at the Washtenaw Community College up there because I found out they've got like 12 electric car chargers up there. I was in heaven charging up my car. So I wandered around the campus a little bit, picked up a campus paper, and in there was a story that I haven't seen this in any of the other press things. I haven't seen this anywhere else, that the Trump administration has banned federal agencies from recognizing a whole bunch of holidays, a whole bunch of things like Juneteenth now. The federal government can't acknowledge Juneteenth. Holocaust Remembrance Day is forbidden by the Trump administration, and Black History Month is now forbidden by the Trump administration. And the only reason to do this, for a government to do this, is to make people forget what these holidays and what these anniversaries are marking. And so this is a terrible thing, and we can't allow this to happen. So I think that we have to be aware of what's going on. And one thing we also need to be aware of is what they're doing up there in Columbus. And we've talked in the past about Senate Bill 2, which is they're going to have actually another hearing this Tuesday, I guess, in response to what all the corporations were telling them when they testified at the earlier hearings. So I managed to land an interview with Cathy Cowan-Becker, who was the only non-corporate person to actually testified at that hearing last Tuesday on Senate Bill 2, which is a comprehensive energy bill. Let's go to that interview now. Hello, and welcome back to For a Green Future. Could you please share with our audience your name and who you're with?
Yeah, my name is Cathy Cowan-Becker, and I'm the board president for an aspiring nonprofit, or actually a current C4 nonprofit called Save Ohio Parks.
Hey, cool. And I asked you on this week because earlier in the week you gave some testimony on SB2. And could you just give us a little general background about SB2 and what it is, what it did, or what it's proposing to do?
Yeah, it's a very big bill. So Senate Bill 2 is a piece of comprehensive energy legislation, and it has a companion bill in the House called House Bill 15. But Senate Bill 2 is even more wide-ranging than House Bill 15. It would completely remake the, energy landscape in Ohio, and it does some things that are not so bad, such as not allow utilities to own the means of generating energy, which we don't right now, but there was talk that the utilities might want to do that again, and this would ban that. And it would also ban what are called electric security plans, which apparently were enacted about 8 or 10 years ago, that allow utilities to add certain riders, certain charges to customer bills, and it would phase out those electric security plans. So those are some not so bad things it does. But SB2 and HB 15, another not so bad thing, at least in the current writing of it. Now, when I testified, they said that they are going to have a substitute bill, an updated bill to introduce next week, and the Senate Energy Committee is meeting next Tuesday at 10 a.m., so we'll probably hear more then. But currently, it would repeal the legacy generation resource rider, and that's basically the bailout of the coal plants that Ohioans have paid over $600 million for so far that were in HB 6. And that's tied to these electric security plans I mentioned, so it wouldn't repeal that right away, but would repeal it eventually as those ESPs expired. And then there was another fund within HB6 that I actually wasn't aware of before this, called the Solar Generation Fund. And that has collected so far $60 million to help fund solar plants in Ohio. And only 10 million of that has been sent, so 50 million of that is sitting there. It would completely repeal that immediately, but it doesn't say what it would do with the 50 million that's been collected so far. And then what SB2 has that's beyond HB15 is that it would greatly enhance the Ohio Power Siting Board process for some proposed projects, energy projects. So right now at the Ohio Power Siting Board, if you want to build, I guess, a gas plant or a solar plant, you go through months, if not years, of a process. You hold a public meeting, you submit thousands of pages of application, there's months of public written commenting. At the first public meeting, people can come and hear about it, and then there's also another public meeting, at least one, where the public gets to testify about the plant that's proposed and if they support it or oppose it. And eventually it goes to all of that goes to the Ohio Power Siting Board for a decision. That whole process would be shortened to 4 months, and a much more expedited process. And the other thing it has is it expands the definition of a self-generator. So a self-generator is any entity that owns or hosts an electric generation facility on property that it controls. And so this bill would now allow large energy users, presumably we're talking about data centers. That's kind of what's driving all this is data centers. I can talk about that in a moment, but they would be allowed to, through that expedited process, to build some sort of electric generation facility on land they control, whether it's right next to them or some other place, to create electricity specifically behind the meter, specifically to power that data center or that large electricity user. And so that's what I mentioned before of data centers. There's well over 100 of them in Central Ohio. There's many more coming. So Central Ohio currently uses about 4,000 megawatts of electricity, and with all the data centers that are approved and being built, that's going to increase by another 5,000 megawatts, so it's going to more than double. And there's talk of it getting up to 30,000 megawatts just for Central Ohio. So we're talking about a massive expansion of electricity on the grid. And these are data centers for companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and also AI. So AI is an enormous energy user. And each one of these uses the amount of electricity equivalent to a small city. So that's why the legislature is trying to expedite the process for approving energy generation. But largely, what they don't say is largely it's oil and gas and nuclear. So within SB2, it defines what green energy is, which is previously defined in state law as natural gas and nuclear are defined in our state law as green. And somehow that paragraph in the law doesn't mention solar or wind, which are actually green technologies.
So wait, let's just back up on that point.
So that's what it would do.
So it defines the dirtiest energy sources. You mentioned gas and nuclear, but it also includes coal, right? If you've mixed your coal with some wood chips or some methane. So it defines coal, gas, and nuclear as green energy.
Yeah,
but it does not define wind or solar as green energy.
Correct. Yeah.
That seems a little crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So you were listed as an interested party as opposed to an opponent of this bill. Your organization's weighing of it, you're thinking that overall it's not worth opposing?
Yeah, I guess, we're still, this bill is coming very quickly. It was already the third hearing within 3 weeks, by the time we saw it. And of course, we're all volunteers. So I have a full-time job and also am trying to run a nonprofit. So a second full-time job on top of this. So, I guess we did interested party because of the things I mentioned up front, that there's some things it does that are not so bad, but then there's some things that it does that we're very concerned about. So we came out as interested party.
Okay, so I noticed, I watched most of the hearing. I didn't see the very beginning of it, but it seemed like this hearing was all about the corporations, right? It was the senators talking to the businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And were you the only representative of like just people in that hearing process?
In that one last week, yeah. It was all the utilities came out to oppose the first two things I mentioned. They want the OVEC bailouts, and they want to be able to charge customers more money on the electric security plans. So they all, like 4 of them came out, and they each had a long testimony, and then they also had a long back and forth with the senators on the committee, probably 15, 20 minutes each of back and forth. So then I got up and testified basically about, we're very concerned about the impacts of this on the communities where these data centers are. My community is one of them. I literally have a data center across the street and probably 4 of them within 5 miles of my house. I don't want them installing a gas plant or a nuclear plant right next door. These are residential areas where these data centers are. So, talking about that and talking about the expedited process, where's the way for people to weigh in? Where is the impact on the environment being evaluated? There's nothing in the bill about either of those things, and talked about the impact of the environment of fracking and methane.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't have any questions for me at the end, and I was the last witness, and they had no questions for me, but whereas they had talked quite a bit. And they also were promising the utilities, well, we'll have a new version of the bill out next week.
Yeah, and I was following some of that long, boring corporate speak going back and forth with the senators, and it just struck me that all of it was the utility company saying, well, we like this bill, but we can make it even more profitable for us if you do X.
Mm-hmm.
And just one example of one of the things they want them to do is to change the approval process for generation from instead of applying for each one, you do like a 3-year process and say, over the next 3 years, we're going to want this much. But they also want to get rid of what are called clawbacks. That is, if they go to the Public Service Commission and say, oh, we need a big rate increase to build this or that, or to do this or that, and then it turns out that they didn't need that increase at all. Turned out to be they overestimated what it would cost, and they just basically got money from the ratepayers. So if you both get to make 3-year projections and you no longer have to do clawbacks, it seems like what they would be doing is simply saying, oh, oops, we overcharged you. Sorry, we're going to keep the money, but, we're really contrite about that. So,
yeah, I mean, it's just like the OVEC money, the bailouts that we've paid so far. They want to keep the OVEC bailouts, but if somehow those are canceled, well, they certainly don't want to refund that money. And that's something we said in our testimonies, that money should be refunded.
mm-hmm. Well, so also in your testimony, you mentioned 3 bills that I know we actually had you on at one point to talk about one of them that were in the last legislative session that looked like they might be like an actual positive thing, but it turns out none of those are in this bill. Could you just mention those real quick?
Sure. And so last session, which ended in December with a lame duck, at least one of these bills was very close to passing. It had already, I think 2 of them had already passed one house, and they were in hearings in the Senate. And often during lame duck, when a bill is in committee hearing, it'll get going. If it passes the committee, it'll be sent to the floor like that day, and it'll probably pass and then be signed into law. So at least one of these bills, which is House Bill 79, was at that point. And what they did is they just canceled the committee hearing. So there was no vote on the committee. And so then it didn't end up passing. But House Bill 79 would set up a voluntary energy efficiency program So another thing HB6 did is it repealed, destroyed Ohio's energy efficiency program, through which the utilities would install devices and help people upgrade their homes to use less energy. And it had saved Ohioans, I think, $5 billion on utility bills over about 9 years. Well, that was repealed in HB6. So this would, and that was a required program at that point. This would be a voluntary energy efficiency program that utilities and people could participate in if they wanted. So it's not as good as what was repealed, but it's something. And like I said, that one was the committee hearing was simply canceled. And then a couple of others that we mentioned were Senate Bill 275. This was sponsored by a Republican, Matt Dolan. It would set up a virtual net metering program on distressed land like brownfields, former mines, and virtual net metering would bring in a lot of clean energy to set up on those lands. And by allowing virtual net metering, that means that it was mainly aimed towards businesses who could purchase the power that was created there through the solar array wouldn't have to be attached to your building, but you could buy into it. And so that's a way to get businesses to buy clean energy and to produce a lot more clean energy. That one was left on the cutting room floor. And then another one called House Bill 197, and it did have a Senate companion bill that I'm not remembering the number for right now, but that would set up a community solar program, which is similar to virtual net metering, but for individuals and residents and small businesses. You could set up a solar array on like a government building roof or really anywhere, and people could buy into that to offset their home electricity use or their apartment. Like a lot of people can't get solar because they have an apartment or a condo or their roof is covered in trees or just too steep. And so this would allow them to use clean energy. Well, that one didn't make it either. So we asked to include all of those bills. We were told at the time during lame duck, after all of those bills were pulled or not passed, that Matt Huffman gave an interview where he said, well, we have comprehensive energy legislation coming next session. And so look for this, we're going to deal with all this then. Well, it's not, here's the comprehensive energy legislation and it's not in there. So.
All right. So this leads me to ask maybe a difficult question. Do you think you and I know a lot of other organizations supported, especially the community solar program. Do you think maybe that was just a legislative trick that you were basically being strung along? And that the Republicans never had any intention of doing any of those things?
Well, that one, I don't remember who the original sponsors were on that one, but I think the sponsors really wanted it, and I know the organizations involved were, getting people to testify for it, and we really wanted it. I think there's value in bringing it up and getting it into the public discourse, but, it's a highly gerrymandered super majority Republican legislature, and a lot of them take a lot of donations from oil and gas. And so, one might say it's going to be hard to get in any clean energy through this legislature because the Ohio law is extremely tipped towards oil and gas and against solar and wind. It's, the parity, there's no parity. The law actively tries to suppress solar and wind and actively promotes oil and gas.
So I guess your answer is maybe.
Yeah, I still think it's worth bringing these things up, but okay. You're against some really big headwinds in the Ohio legislature.
Okay, so is there anything you'd like to add?
Just that we need a lot more people to speak up about Senate Bill 2, about the expedited approval of, what's probably going to be mostly gas plants. And, nuclear, they're talking about this small thermal nuclear reactors. I've seen talk about that for years. I've never seen that actually taking place, and it's very expensive. So in practical reality, what we're talking about are gas plants. And there's already a data center that has already put a gas plant in the OPSB, the Power Siting Board process, for approval to power that data center. It's already started. And we need a lot more people to speak up about the effects on environment, the effects on their communities of having these self-generators able to put this in a very expedited fashion. Like, we're going to have little gas plants built out all over Ohio, and a lot of them in residential areas. If that's what this bill would do, and people need to speak up.
Okay, and how do they find your organization?
So look at saveohioparks.org is the website for our organization. We're currently running a campaign asking Governor DeWine to issue a moratorium on fracking public lands. You can find that on our homepage. And then look up the Ohio Senate Energy Committee, and that's where this bill is. And you can find that bill, and you can find out when the meetings are and how to testify. The next meeting is Tuesday, March 3rd, I think is the date.
4th, I think.
4th, Tuesday, March 4th, thank you, at 10 a.m. And you need to have testimony in by Monday, March 3rd at 10 a.m. Even if it's written, that's fine. If you can't make it down there, just submit something and try to at least let your voice be heard.
Okay. And that's what we're all about here on For a Green Future, is letting people's voices be heard. And Rebecca, I guess you're with us now, and I just heard a voice. I just heard a voice in your background. What's
Oh, yeah, from the room next door. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, before we go to Rebecca's portion, it's time to talk about our advertisers and patrons, our wonderful, wonderful advertisers and patrons. So imagine a place where nature meets adventure, where you can climb, paddle, fish, and explore. That place, it's right here in Wood County. The Wood County Park District is here to protect, preserve, and inspire. We conserve natural and cultural treasures so you can enjoy the outdoors like never before. By maintaining green spaces, providing fun programs, restoring wildlife habitats, and leading outdoor adventures. Want to connect with nature? Try your hand at archery, bouldering, geocaching, paddling, rappelling, and more. Whether you're seeing experience or a peaceful retreat, our parks are open every day from 8 a.m. until 30 minutes past sunset all year round. Come, explore, get outside, experience nature. Your parks, your adventures waiting for you. Find us online at wcparks.org or follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and X, or you can call 419-353-1897. The Wood County Park District, preserving nature, creating adventure, and inspiring a greener future. And of course, For Green Futures also brought to you by our patrons. And our patrons are fantastic people who've gone to patreon.com. There, they've searched for a Green Future. Up pops our Patreon page, and people scroll through and they pick a membership level that matches their budget, and there they can, that's how they can support us. And I have to make a really strong pitch. We're in need of patrons right now. We could really use some patrons. So if you're somebody who's been saying to yourself, I really should sign up for $5 or $10 a month to keep that show going, this is the time to do it, folks. Do not hesitate any longer. Go to patreon.com to become a patron to For a Green Future. And then a couple announcements, public service announcements. There's going to be a showing of the movie Radioactive, The Women of 3 Mile Island, next Saturday, 7 p.m. at the Maumee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church on Dixie Highway, just north of Bowling Green. It's a fantastic movie, and the director, Dr. Heidi Huttner, will be there to do a live Zoom afterwards, so you can ask her any sort of questions. And it's a really inspiring story about 4 women whose families were exposed to radiation during the 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster, which, talking about institutional memory, a lot of people have forgotten or don't know about. And it's a very important information because, as you heard from our interview with Cathy Cowan-Becker, it's possible all of us could be having nuke plants built right nearby in order to power these crazy data centers. One other public announcement, this is also having to do with the Wood County Park District. They've got a whole bunch of stuff happening in March. One thing today, this very day, up until noon, you can go get a free farm breakfast at Otsego Park. And that's what they're doing is they have their farm there, and the products of that farm, like buckwheat and eggs and ham, They are doing a free breakfast for the community. It goes till noon. You go to Otsego Park and you go to Stone Hall and just go get some breakfast. They're doing yoga at the parks. Every Monday, there's at W&W Night Park. At 4:30 to 5:30, they're doing chair yoga for like seniors. And then 6 to 7, they're doing the full yoga with the mats and everything. That's fun. And they have all sorts of trainings to recognize plants and animals. Yeah, they're going to have a frog monitoring training. That's Tuesday the 4th from 6:30 to 8:30. And they also have a book club. They've got full moon walks. They've got all sorts of things. We don't have time to cover all of them, but you can go to their website, wcparks.org, or check them out on social media. They have a really good time. Okay, Rebecca.
Hi there.
Hi. We always have a good time talking with you.
There we go.
Yeah, you're still on the mend, I guess. That's good.
Yeah, they're telling me I'm probably going to get released next week, and I probably will only get 24 hours notice at best.
Okay. All right. Well, fingers are crossed. So, what do you have for us this week?
All right. Well, I have the mysterious and magical Biminy Road, which might be actually, mysterious and magical, or just kind of, explicable by science, mysterious and magical, which is also magical and mysterious, if you ask me. The Biminy Road is off the coast of Bimini, which is part of the Bahamas island chain. So it's an archipelago within an archipelago, and yeah, it's also called the Bimini Wall, and it's an underwater rock formation near North Bimini Island, with rectangular limestone blocks. And some people think it is actually part of Atlantis, or part of a pier, wall, road, or breakwater. So there's all kinds of conspiracies about the theories about this thing or other man-made structure. There is no actual good evidence for this theory, according to the overwhelming majority of the scientific community. But the Bimini Wall was discovered, quote unquote, could have been the natives knew about it for a while, by a trio of divers in 1968. And it has two similar linear features. One is parallel to it, and another one is, shoreward of the wall. So it also has polygonal and irregular blocks thrown in there, and it's about half a mile long, composed of blocks between 7 to 13 feet, and some of them look like giant loaves of bread. We know from carbon dating and whatnot, it was first exposed to coastal erosion about 2,000 years ago. So, yeah, nobody really seems to have a good scientific explanation of how it got there. It's composed of beach rock mostly, but it actually has some really magical ecology going on there. It's got algae encrusting sponges on the rocks, hard corals, fish feed and shelter in the crevasses and ledges around it. It's also in shallow water and subject to tidal changes. So many organisms are ultimately exposed and submerged, and the nearby seagrass beds are important to feeding grounds for juvenile fish and other creatures. Some things threatening it might be potential for damage to coral and marine life from anchors or careless diving practices, because it's gotten so popular, of course, and there's a price for that to some degree. And it could also be affected by rising sea levels and ocean temps, but it sounds like overall it's in pretty good shape for now. Bimini in general has a lot going on ecologically. It's home to some beautiful mangrove systems, and it's in both the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. I guess one side is in one and one is in the other. And it's also got the Gulf Stream going through it, so it's a great place to go and experience nature, apparently, or learn about, whichever strikes your fancy.
All right. That's cool.
And if you see any mermaids, quote unquote, don't get frisky with the manatees like Columbus might have. They're saying.
All right. Yeah. Good advice. And yeah, I have seen a couple of those, is this Atlantis documentaries, quote unquote documentaries, like on the History Channel. It really is
Right.
very striking features there. So, all right. Well, thanks,
Yeah.
Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Yeah. All right. I guess if the sound's okay, you can stick around while we do
All right.
the news here. All right.
All right.
Off to ecological news. First story, and this is kind of an interesting story for a lot of reasons. We're going off to Columbiana County, and this story was sent in by a helpful listener, and it was interesting because he sent me the story and then had a link to the YouTube channel or a YouTube video on it, and I went to try to follow that link this morning when I was preparing for the show, and the YouTube video had been removed, and it just harkens back to this whole institutional memory thing, cultural memory thing, because when everything's online like that, it can just be deleted. Luckily, I went back to the station that had television station that done the story, and they still had the video up on their website, just not on YouTube anymore. And so I'm able to report. This is from WFMJ.com. The story ran on February 28th. And the title is, Columbiana County Solar Project. And what has happened is there's a gas plant down there that processes fracked gas, because Columbiana County is like in the middle of frack land. And it's called the Kensington Process Plant. And the interesting thing about this story is they are putting up a solar project. They want to put up 22 megawatts, covering about 100 acres. And the thing about Columbiana County is that they are one of the counties in Ohio that has completely banned solar. So, in other words, they're in the pocket of the fracking industry, because solar competes with fracking, and so they've gone completely anti-solar, except for this project, because this project is going to benefit a gas plant. And so now the same county commissioners who were just saying solar is this horrible thing that's going to kill us all, now they're saying, oh, but for gas plants this is fine. We love it. And so it just I just want to point out the complete hypocrisy of local legislators. Like, there's a fellow, Mike Halleck, there, who was one of the people who pushed through the solar power ban, but who has no problem when solar power is powering gas. And it's also very telling that even at a gas plant, even a place that can get the gas literally for free, solar is still cheaper and more economical and more efficient than trying to run a gas generator to give you the power you need to run your gas plant. And you can actually see this all over Northwest Ohio when they have those little sheds, those little brick buildings that have the gas valves in them. There's solar panels on all of them. It's because solar is cheaper and more practical and cleaner and better than gas, and even the gas companies know this. So, just an interesting story. Next story, on to thedriven.io. And the title of this story that ran on February 24th, Trump and Musk pull plug on national EV network as they wage war on other people's EVs. And what it is that Trump, through the General Services Administration, which is the part of the federal government that takes care of the infrastructure for the rest of the federal government, they make sure the pipes aren't leaking and the buildings are, standing and structurally sound and everything. They've been ordered to tear out 8,000 electric car charging stations and completely mothball all of the electric cars that the federal government owns. And the whole thing about Doge, the whole thing about the mumps, Trumps and Musks, that they're supposedly saving us all this money with all this stuff they're doing to the federal government. Well, if you've already installed the chargers and you already own the cars, then tearing out the chargers and mothballing the cars is literally just throwing away billions and billions of dollars, especially because once you've bought the cars, the cost of maintaining an electric car versus a gas car is less than half. It's a fraction. And so you're saving tons of money with the cars you've already got, and filling up with electricity, charging up, only costs a fraction of what it costs to fill up with gasoline. And so they're going to be costing us, again, hundreds of billions of dollars with this really stupid policy because they don't like other people's electric cars. Now, one of the reasons to tear out all these charging stations is because they compete with Tesla's charging station. So instead of, having their own charging stations, now people have to go to the Tesla charging stations and pay money directly to Musk to charge their cars. And so it's just super corrupt and just a really bad decision and a waste of taxpayer dollars. So thought I'd mention that. Next story, commondreams.org. And this also ran on February 24th. And title is Farmers Sue Trump USDA Over Deletion of Vital Climate Information. So what it is that the Trump administration has instructed all the federal agencies to eliminate any references to global warming. And in the Department of Agriculture, that includes information on things like how to plant and what to plant in order to have your farm be resilient in the situation of higher temperatures and less rainfall. Well, if you deny global warming, you deny there's going to be higher temperatures and decreased rainfall because that's part of global warming. And so the farmers are left with no information on how to adapt to this situation and how to keep growing food in a global warming world. If you deny there's global warming, I guess they're expected to just plant what they used to plant and lose their crops. This is filed in federal court in the Southern District of New York. And what they're claiming is that the unlawful purge of climate-related policy guides and data sets and resources, that they basically are denying vital information to farmers who need this information in order to grow food. The suit's being brought by the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York, Earth Justice, Night First, the Amendment Institute at Columbia University, NRDC, and the Environmental Working Group. And they're also saying in their suit that this doesn't just hurt the farmers, it violates federal laws, including the Federal Freedom of Information Act, the Administrative Procedures Act. And one of the quotes of one of the people who's in the lawsuit, "We're farmers, we're on the front lines. We know climate change is not a hoax. We need every piece of science and intergenerational knowledge to adjust to this new reality." So there again, we're talking about that cultural knowledge that the administration, the Trump administration, is just trying to wipe out. Okay, next story. And this is a little bit of karma, instant karma for the mumps. Tesla CEO Elon Musk should be cheering Europe's booming EV market. Here's why he's not. And this was in Fortune magazine back on February 25th. And essentially what's happened in Europe is that Elon Musk went to Germany for their last elections, and he campaigned for the ultra-far right party, the NFP, which is essentially the Nazi party, basically. Or I'm sorry, the AFD. Did I say NFD? AFD party. And that has really turned off the Europeans, who still have a cultural memory of what Hitler was like and World War II was like and fascism was like. And so even though EV sales in Europe have surged 37% from last January to this January, Tesla sales have fallen 45%. And Tesla's share of the EV market in Europe has dropped to 6%, down from 15%. And registrations plunged 45% between January 25 and January 2024. So this is, this is in places that still have this kind of memory. this kind of reaction is very natural and predictable, and which is why why the mumps are so intent on wiping that out in the U.S. Some other positive data, some other from Europe there. The number of internal combustion engines sales have been they've dropped down to 39.4% of all vehicle sales. That's a 9.2% drop from just last year. So that means last year they were at about 50%, and now they're down to about 40%. And so the percentage of internal combustion engines is steadily falling, from about a half to about a third now. Altogether, car sales of all kinds have dropped 2.1%. And we've reported before that part of the reason for that is a lot of people are switching to the electric scooters. You know, especially if you live in a city, you can go forget about cars and just use these scooters. And it appears, from all this, that globally we have already passed what's called peak car. That happened in 2018. That was when the world sold the most cars, and we are down 30% from the 2018 total. So this whole idea that everything has to depend on cars had better be wrong, because the number of cars being sold is falling pretty steeply. So that was kind of a fun story of Musk getting a little bit of comeuppance there. And I wanted to ask a question about this, because it seems like around here, all of a sudden I'm seeing a lot more brand new Teslas. And I'm wondering if the conservative people their love of Musk has overcome their hatred of EVs, and maybe conservatives are buying Teslas now. I don't know. If you're a conservative who's done that, please give us a call or drop us a text or an email.
I think it's probably libertarians. I don't know.
Could be. I don't know. Okay, on to, we're going to come back to Ohio here. Canary Media on February 19th, story titled, Rural Ohioans Oppose Solar Farms, Right? ? Not so, developer finds. And what's happened is Open Road Renewables has been trying to put a solar farm in place, and there were a whole bunch of anti-solar public comments on it. If you just look at the number of positive versus negative, it looks like there's a majority that actually oppose the solar. Well, they looked at these public comments and did a little more analysis, and it turns out that 80% of the people who responded support the solar project, want there to be more solar, but the anti-solar people are gaming the system. 16 people who made comments, they each put in 150 negative comments. And so, most of the pro people just put one comment each, but the antis are gaming the system by flooding it with negative comments. There were about 2,500 comments. 600 of them were just word for word repeats by this same small group of people. And so this is all happening down there in Logan County, and this whole project is before the Ohio Supreme Court. And so it's kind of important when they're considering, is there public support for it? The answer is yes. And this matches public surveys where the overwhelming number of people like solar energy because it's so clean and cheap and simple. And that is reflected in the 80% of the people who put in, even though the majority of the comments were negative, thanks to these cheaters, basically. Okay, so final story, and I wanted to get something positive here. GlassAlmanac.com, story on March 1st. A country is constructing a 30-gigawatt hybrid wind and solar power plant. Madness or genius? ? And the country in question is India, up in northwest India. They're building a 30-gigawatt hybrid plant that's equal to the power of 30 nuclear power plants. It's going to cost $18 billion for 30 gigawatts and power 16 million homes. It's going to cover 200 square miles. It's going to be both wind turbines and solar panels. It's an extremely sunny part of the country. It's part of the Gujarat desert near Kavda, That's close to the Pakistan border. It's going to be completed in 2030, but it's already generating 1.7 gigawatts. This is one of the cool things about wind and solar is that you can start powering. You don't have to wait till it's done and then throw a switch. You can start the power as you put each turbine in and each solar panel in. So it's much quicker and more efficient. 770 wind turbines, 60 million solar panels. And just a quick comparison, this is $18 billion for 30 gigawatts of wind and solar versus in the U.S., we just spent $36 billion to get 2 gigawatts from the Vogtle nuke plants. So one other quick note, that's our show pretty much, but the trial of Greenpeace has begun over there in North Dakota, where Energy Partners is trying to bankrupt Greenpeace with a $300 million lawsuit. We're going to be having more updates on that next week, but this trial has begun. Let's all pray for Greenpeace. That's it. That's our show. Thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare, and Rebecca Wood has already signed off, but we both thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time